Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess. All of their rights.
We just believed in Mr. Randolph. Nobody couldn't tell us, me.
Philip Randolph was a charismatic leader that devoted his life to African American equality. Randolph worked odd jobs and devoted his life to singing, acting, and reading in his early life. However, after reading Webb Du Bois' The Soul of Black Folk, he was convinced that the fight for social equality was more important than almost anything else. He moved to New York City in 1911 to become an actor, but gave up after failing to win his parents' approval. Then in 1925, Philip Randolph founded the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porter to aim to improve the working conditions and treatment of African American railroad porters and maids employed by Pullman Company, a manufacturer and operator of railroad cars. Philip Randolph's effort to mitigate racial inequality during World War II was effective in that it banned discriminatory employment practices by federal agencies and kindled the civil rights movement in America. During World War II, many African Americans worked in the defense industry. According to the U.S. Army, Kerry Pleasant, a JMC historian, states that during World War II, more than 2.5 million African American men registered for the draft. And African American women volunteered in large numbers. When combined with the black women enlisted in the Women's Army Corps, more than 1 million African Americans served the Army during war. However, back in the U.S., many African Americans working from home supported the war by working in the defense and arms factories. Commonly, this was called the Double V campaign. They wanted victory in war by fighting fascism and a victory at home by fighting racism and racial inequality. However, racism was clearly present, especially in the workforce and military. Both the military and workforce segregated the African American and the white American, believing that they were not capable enough to do the same work as them. The work they did was more tedious, and they were still treated like second-class citizens. In efforts to change this, Philip Randolph planned a march in Washington, in the Capitol, with more than 100,000 other African Americans. From this, they were trying to achieve more moral practices from employers and the military industry. They feared that a significant amount of African American laborers would go on strike, and that more than 100,000 African Americans would march in the Capitol. President Roosevelt issued Executive Order A802. The picture above shows the official document of Executive Order A802. What the document does is that it bans all discriminatory employment practices by federal agencies and all unions and companies engaged in war-related work. Roosevelt also issued the creation of the Fair Employment Practices Committee to enforce Executive Order A802. Because of Randolph's effort, many African Americans were subjected to fair employment and no discriminatory practices. However, historians might argue that the Executive Order 802 was ineffective in ending racial discrimination in America, because discrimination was still prevalent in the military industry. A prime example of this is the Alabama Dry Dock riot in 1943. In response to President Roosevelt's Fair Employment Practice Committee issuing directions to elevate African American to skilled professions in the spring of 1943, Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company decided to raise 12 black workers to the level of welder, a position traditionally designated for white personnel. But shortly after the new welders ended their first shift, an estimated 4,000 white shipyard workers and community people armed with pipes, clubs, and other lethal weapons attacked any black employee they could find. According to Bruce Nelson, a history professor at Dartmouth University, Alabama Dry Dock employed about 7,000 African American, and when they were promoted to a higher position, white workers were outraged and screamed racial slurs to them. The mob tossed 2 black men into the Mobile River, while others jumped in to avoid being seriously hurt. It was reported that executives and supervisors did not stop the severe beating. This disturbing event was reported to the public as not gruesome as it was actually was. As shown in the local Alabama Mobile News, the press did not report the actual beating and discriminate assaults that happened, rather warning people that racism is helping Hitler and the American people should advance to winning the war. The problem with this is that it does not cover the most important part of African American people getting brutally beaten, and therefore this shows even though the Executive Order A802 was issued, racism and discriminatory practices were still prevalent in the military industry of the U.S., making Randolph's effort meaningless to a certain extent.